Okay. David Zinn,
Yeah.
thank you for joining me.
Happy to be here.
You are kind of a legend in Ann Arbor.
Um,
I can tell you don't really like that. You're kind of a low-key guy.
well, infamous is always something that any artist wants
Oh,
to be, or a
infamous.
rumor, or maybe real, maybe something people made up. Sure, yeah, in
I
that
think
sense.
I think you're all of
In
those
as much
things.
as legends are usually mostly stuff people made up on the fly. Sure, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that works.
Infamous is definitely a word
Right,
we could use as well.
yeah.
I know that people look for your art
Mm-hmm.
everywhere, and when they find one, it's kind of an exciting thing because it doesn't last very long.
That's true. That's true.
So so they're excited
Mm-hmm.
because it's a moment in time that you're never going to get back.
Exactly. That is one thing I like about especially temporary art installations in public, is that instead of being there long enough to become famous, as it were, they disappear shortly after they've been made. So that means that the people who actually see it in real life is a very elite group of strangers who have not met. But that group of strangers is never going to get any bigger. It's not going to be like a following of people that go to that spot. They're like, oh, let's go see the thing. And then eventually that becomes be like, do we have to go see the thing? Yes, we have to go see the thing because it's a very famous thing. But you never get that. It cuts off at the one day the people were in the right place at the right time to usually look at one spot by accident and get this shared experience.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that.
It is a magical thing. I remember I had my own David
Oh, good.
Zinn sighting,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I was proud because sometimes you'll put on your social media kind of little clues to how
Mm-hmm.
to find
Mm-hmm.
your pieces when you've created them. But I found this one just by happenstance
Nice.
around Ann Arbor, and that was a fun moment for me. And it's kind of an iconic thing. You're walking
Mm.
around Ann Arbor and come
Mm-hmm.
across a David Zinn piece.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost a um, what's the word that I'm looking for? Like a rite of passage
Oh,
as
cool.
an Ann Arborite. I think I think so.
Well, I think um, there is sort of an award that it places on somebody only in that it means they were paying attention to their surroundings. Some people online, periodically the question comes up like, do you hang around to see people's reactions? Which first of all just seems inappropriate because their reactions that's their day, not mine. I'm not gonna like jump up and go, ha ha, that ruined the whole thing. But even beyond that, when I have just been nearby putting chalk back in a box, it's a very humbling experience because you see how many people will walk directly over the spot which you thought you just made very special and is very special to yourself as the artist, because people are taking in so much information with every step they take. It's very understandable if they don't like actually see every square foot of ground in front of them, because that would be a terrible way to walk. You'd be like, ah, ooh, ah, he, trying to notice every little bit thing underfoot. No, most people are very much on autopilot because most of these drawings happen in between point A and point B of where someone's trying to get their day accomplished. So I do feel that maybe the people who tend to see these are the people who are more prepared to see something unexpected, who are more awake between point A and point B. And I'm glad there can be something pleasant for them to notice because of their awareness of their surroundings.
Yes.
Yeah, that's nice.
So when you're in Ann Arbor, maybe
Mm-hmm.
pay attention from your destination,
Yes.
from point A to point B. Maybe just look around a little bit
Yeah.
because you might be surprised.
And even beyond, I mean, I feel a little weird even saying it's a reward because it's just a silly thing that I drew. But I think the real reward that I've heard back on from some people is that if you get in the habit of staying fully alert between point A and point B, you'll see a lot of other stuff too that is not something that I made, and might be, first of all, a lot of people I've noticed, they'll send me messages saying like, I keep seeing things that I thought you'd drawn on, but it was just the thing that I see it and I think, oh, what would he have done with that? Which I hope eventually leads to them doing something with that, because it's a big world. There's a lot of
Yeah.
things. I don't have to do all of them. I could use the help. But even beyond that, that you're going to notice stuff that isn't in any way art or potential art. It's just the stuff around you that day because you weren't on autopilot.
Speaking of seeing things that could be art, tell me a little bit about how that became your thing.
Right. Well, the important confession of it, I think, is that one of the reasons I'm not a big A artist, a traditional artist, is because as most people over the age of 5 are, I actually struggle a little bit with making art on a blank canvas. I think that's why a lot of people think they aren't artists. It's because after they stopped being toddlers, they reached a point where if someone said, just draw whatever you want on this blank piece of paper, they couldn't take the first step. And they think that artists don't have trouble taking the first step, when actually artists usually have just found some sneaky workaround to get through this universal hesitation of like, oh, but it's so perfect and so blank. What if I make a mark on it and it's not as good as just leaving it blank? I just shouldn't. I don't.
Or some of the greats who just have painted the same thing over and over and
exactly.
over and over again.
Yeah, you have to have some way of getting something onto the empty space, because the empty space doesn't give you anything to play with. Nothing at all. It's a lot of opportunity, but not a lot of nudge into any particular choice. And the sidewalk is gloriously not blank. There's a lot of stuff already there that you have to deal with one way or the other, which in some ways would seem like it'd be a problem, because now it's limiting your opportunities, because you can't have an intricate plan that you want to execute and then try to execute it in a place where there's a big blemish in the middle of the face of the beautiful, portrait you wanted to draw. But it actually, if you have no plan, facilitates a lot of interesting ideas you might not have even thought of, except for that blemish, which is now the reason why you're drawing what you're drawing. So the so-called obstacle becomes the inspiration, which I didn't know that was out there, but when I found it, it was hard to go back to blank paper. Too hard. Yeah.
How did you become an artist?
By accident. Well, I guess a lot depends on what you consider that word to mean. I think that's another thing that I and a lot of people struggle with, is this idea that you're not allowed to call yourself an artist unless it's how you pay the rent, that you have to make a living at it. Or there seem to be two preconceived notions. One is that only professional artists are allowed to call themselves artists. The rest of us, if we call ourselves that, is like, oh, aren't you getting pretty big for your boots? And the other direction of it is, well, art is a very fancy thing that requires very fancy, expensive tools and a lot of training and talent, which is either expensive or awarded by some supernatural power that you cannot, affect. So either you have it or you don't. All these limitations that only a very small number of people are allowed to be called artists. So on that front, I am not currently an artist, because I don't have the fancy tools. I don't think there has been any weird talent, and I didn't go to school for this. And the only way in which I can't ignore the fact that I am supposedly an artist is I do actually pay the rent by drawing stuff. And by that definition, I'm nothing else. So I guess I have to put on that hat. But it started out as just, it was a crutch for shyness. It was an easy way to be a kid who got really nervous around other people, because I grew up in the middle of nowhere where there weren't very many people. And when I was around people, I was always wrapped up in wondering if I was going to have a conversation, and how do those go, and what are you supposed to say, and how are you supposed to walk, and am I wearing weird? So a good way to get around that was to always be drawing, because the nice thing about drawing is it doesn't require anyone else to be involved. It doesn't require any fancy tools, because you can use the back of a placemat or a napkin in a pinch. And it requires your eyes and your hands to be occupied in this space where the drawing is being made. So when you're in a crowd of people, if you are using your hands and more importantly your eyes to focus on this spot, now it's much harder for people to talk to you because they'd have to break through this bubble of isolation that you've created with this one piece of paper. So the only reason I ended up, I suppose, practicing drawing a lot was because it was preferable to interacting with people. And it worked great for a long time, except for the small number of people in the world who aren't repelled by that bubble. And I owe a lot to those people, the people who are so outgoing that instead of being repelled by the weird kid who's just, they want to know what's happening there, and they're willing to intervene and ask. And it's because of those people that it actually became my job. So I owe them a big debt for taking my crutch and making it into a career.
Yeah, I actually know a little bit about this because I heard a story from you about your doodles at a job when you were clocking in.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it's worth explaining this because it's not a natural path to take something that you were not taking seriously and have it become such a big part of your life. But I was involved in an organization on campus when I was a student and after college as well, where we had to sign in on a big sign-in board whenever we showed up for the day because they needed to know if everybody was actually in the building or not. And so there was a bunch of dates down the side and all the names across the top, and everybody had a little blank box that they had to fill to make sure people knew that they're, and an X would have been sufficient. Check marks were very popular. But if you're a compulsive doodler like I was, it was too much of an opportunity to ignore. That you had this little space that you could put, as long as you put something in there, great. So why not, have some fun with it? And after a while I realized I had to show up early in order to be on time because it took me so long just to get past the sign-in boards that I was actually present. I think a couple of times I was considered late just because I was there, but I wasn't finished arriving there yet. And it was, something everybody had to use. So after many, many weeks of doing this, someone else in the same organization who had just gotten a job where they needed to hire an illustrator to execute the ideas that she was having for a children's interactive display, had no idea where to find an illustrator because she was fairly young as well. But she did notice that on the sign-in board there was somebody who clearly really, really liked to draw. And so she only tracked me down because it was doodle, 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 drawing, doodle, my name. And otherwise we would have never connected. So networking, I guess, but a very eccentric form of networking. It involved a lot of little monsters and voice balloons and things.
Yeah, that's such a fun connection of how things just serendipitously came about.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah.
I'm very lucky that happened.
Fantastic. So that's kind of how you got your first paying
That was
job?
my actual first paying job, working for the city of Ann Arbor, as it happens. And worked for the city of Ann Arbor for probably close to 20 years, doing illustrations of garbage and recyclables and piles of leaves for leaf collection explanations. And it was pleasantly and surprisingly similar to just the kind of doodling I'd done as a child, because it wasn't fancy art. It wasn't, a big blank canvas in an attic in Paris where you're, trying to put your heart onto the page. It was just, we have a problem and we need to solve it using art. We have a lot of instructions that no one's going to read if it's just a page of text, because that's really dense and people tend to just ignore it, and we don't want them to ignore it. So maybe if we add some pictures, people will actually stop to look at them. And it seemed to work pretty well.
Yeah.
We took a very childish approach of making up our own brands of soda and pizza and cereal, and then stuck them on stickers inside all the dumpsters in town. And people got curious. and especially kids started to notice these childlike drawings. And I don't know if that was our original plan, but we discovered that if you explain to kids how to recycle, they will harass their parents endlessly about proper recycling. So it was a pretty smart move in the end. Not that it was on purpose, but at least not on my part. But the city was being pretty smart about it. Yeah.
Fascinating. So let's talk a little bit about the Ann Arbor Art Festival.
Yes.
You do art there, which normally you are doing art, and if somebody happens to find you doing it, that's very exciting for them, but they're
It's
not going
random.
to know when or where you're
Right.
doing that. But the Ann Arbor Art Festival is one of the few times when people know where and when you're going to be there.
It has evolved into that.
Yeah.
I was originally drawing at the Ann Arbor Summer Festival just at random, like I do everywhere else, because it was a nice place to be on a summer evening. So I think everybody tended to graduate down to hanging out where the summer festival was happening, especially since it happened slightly before the Ann Arbor Art Fair, which is more for people from out of town. So townies in particular, I think, come out and just want to hang out together down there. So at first I was just doing it because it was a happy place to be. Then, to their credit, when they discovered me drawing at the Ann Arbor Summer Festival, just as somebody who was wandering through, they invited me to actually be there on purpose and do exactly what I was doing, but as part of the festival. And that's a huge compliment that I was very happy about, because to be part of that festival after growing up with that festival, I mean, huge pride in that. And for a while, they even let it happen as randomly as it does at any other time. Just when the weather was nice, just, you know, a certain number of times, make sure it happens in this one spot. More recently, you know, we've understood that people like to know, and we did specify specific days when it was going to happen. So now you had a place and at least a day, if not a precise time. Which was a huge relief, I think, to the people who work at the festival every day, because I did not like the fact that so many people were getting bombarded with questions like, is he here? Where is he? And I don't want somebody to have to deal with that. You know, we tried little ways to make it a little easier to know when it was happening. I had a little flying pig with wings that I laminated that had some Velcro on the back, and when I showed up, I would smack them up on a wall so people could just see if the pigs are flying, then that means something's happening. But I would get really tired at the end of the day, and often left that poor pig up for days and days at a time. And I'm sure there are some people walking through Ingalls Mall at 2 a.m. going, is he drawing now? He's not drawing now. But I could be, so understandable confusion. So now we've reached a point where, for the convenience of the public, there are specific days where, weather permitting, and that's a big one at the Summer Festival, I will definitely be drawing something somewhere in that space. But it will be somewhere, which is nice because it preserves a little bit of the same scavenger hunt feeling. It's not on a stage somewhere where you can arrive and like set up. People who know my art know how to narrow that down, because it's going to be in the shade. Not for my comfort, but because the imaginary creatures need the shade in order to look more real. And there's one particularly shade-creating object in Ingalls Mall, so you can usually go by where the shade is.
That's a little hint for those
Yeah.
watching if you're looking for it. So when you're creating, or when you go to create, do you have an idea already of what you're going to create, or
Certainly.
how do you go about that?
I learned pretty early on, when on one day I had an idea for a specific breed of dog that I wanted to draw for somebody, and went outside to draw it on the sidewalk, because that's where I had the best happy times drawing. And I looked all day for a spot that wanted to have that dog drawn on it, and I never found it. Never drew anything that day, because I was trying to fit the idea to a very messy space. and ignore all the other things that kept saying they wanted to be drawn instead. So ever since then, it's been very clear in my mind that the best way to avoid failure is to have no plan. Because if you have a plan, now you have to actually successfully complete the plan, or else you have failed. Whereas if you didn't know what you were going to do, even if it took weird turns, even if the first attempt went all sideways and you had to take a completely different direction than you thought, none of that has to count as a failure, because you didn't know what was going to happen. And whatever happens, that's what's supposed to happen. So
I love that.
I think that's generally been useful in my life for a lot of stuff, but certainly with a sidewalk that's going to have the specks and the streaks and the stains and the cracks and the weeds growing out of the corners, if you have no plan, all those things are open to be used in whatever way they want to be used. So best to have no preconceived notions as to what you're going to find and just meet what's there.
I think that's a great way to look at certainly chalk drawing.
Oh, yeah.
But life in general.
I think it's had an accidental benefit. It's sort of an accidental mindfulness reinforcement to try to have as few expectations as possible, so as to open up whatever happens as being fine.
Yeah.
You know, I don't succeed in implementing that in everything, because I still stress about a lot of stuff, just to be clear. But it helps me a lot with that naturally anxious part of myself.
Yeah.
Be like, yeah, whatever happens, it's going to be fine. Yeah.
I'm curious about your tools, because you did mention they're not fancy. Do you just get regular sidewalk chalk?
For the most part, yes. And what I recommend is, the fancier your tools, the more you might feel like you should only use them to make something really good, which is a terrible place to set off on this particular journey. Because something I did not learn early enough, because I didn't go to school for this, is that you can't really make the first thing you ever create with a tool the best thing you're ever going to make. In fact, you should hope it's the worst. Because if the first one was the best, oh my goodness, where else are you going from there? Down? So the best way to make sure that you're willing to play around and just mess around and make mistakes is to be using tools that are not precious, tools that are not incredibly hard to obtain or cost a lot of money. So that you'll just pick them up and use them, and then use them up and get more. And that's one of the reasons why chalk in general is perfect, because it is very easy to obtain, and it is not fancy expensive. And most people have it in their house already. I had some in my house. I'm not sure why. I don't have any kids. But when I wanted to draw with chalk, it was there as if some fairies dropped it off just in case. Like, you might need some chalk. So generally speaking, yes, I buy it in line at the drugstore when it's like half off in the checkout line. I have some very basic standards, if anyone's thinking of buying chalk, that are worth going by, which is if you can separate the green one and the blue one from each other, and you don't know which one was the green and which one was the blue, that chalk's a little too cheap. That means they're not putting really much color in these things at all. And some people try to, skimp on color. So a good variety of colors in your chalk, especially if there's more than one blue, a light blue and a dark blue, or a yellowish blue, a greenish, if you get that full array, and especially if there's a brown or a red, oh goodness, now you're golden. But very basic stuff is enough. Which is one of the nice things about it, is that it's a very childish tool that you've almost certainly used already. And if you even suggest the idea that someone should take a class to learn how to use chalk, they will laugh in your face. Because why? No, it's kid stuff. It's fine. You'll be fine. Draw a stick figure. They'll be great. Yeah.
And you mentioned, when you look at the ground, there's something in your brain that happens when you're looking at things that your mind wants to make it something. What is that called again? Right.
There is something in everybody's brain at all times that we don't really pay much attention to, but you'll know it when you see it. That may be what makes us so successful as organisms. Not to overstate it, but I think this is probably a pretty important habit that is built into the human brain, which is pareidolia. And pareidolia is just a pleasantly obscure and hard to spell word for the fact that we are pattern seekers. It's what we do with this big lump of sponge up here. Any amount of data that we come across, anything in the natural world, anything we hear, anything we see, part of our brain is always sifting through it just to see if there might be something important in there. No matter how unlikely it is, it could just be static, and it's still going to be checking, like, wait, and this may be the key, which is strange, but if it doesn't actually find a pattern, it is very happy to just suggest one, as no matter how ridiculous it might be. Say, well, I mean, I don't think there's anything in here, but it kind of looks like a face. I mean, doesn't it sort of look like a face? So pareidolia is why we see clouds that look like animals, and pareidolia is why people see faces in wallpaper patterns and wood grain, trees with knotholes looking like they're spooky trees, pareidolia. Constellations, to give a more respectable example. I mean, pretty much undeniable that the reason we have constellations is because our ancestors didn't have much to do after the sun went down except stare at the night sky and the stars therein and try not to be eaten by anything until morning. So you stare at a random scattering of stars long enough, yes, your brain will say, I mean, that one and that one and that one kind of looks like a bull. That one kind of looks like a scorpion. And then you give it a few thousand years, a few million years, constellations. All because we are so good at seeking out even the remotest little bit of a pattern in anything random. Our brain clearly hates random and loves a good pattern. So much it'll stitch one together out of minimal materials. I love that.
And you are amazing at using that tool in your brain to create such beautiful and amazing creatures that become your friends.
Well, the nice thing about using pareidolia on the sidewalk is that, in contrast to a puffy cloud in the sky or, you know, a face in a piece of wood, you can add more to it. You can see even just part of the thing, and instead of just pointing to it with your friend, like, that looks kind of like a thing, you can build on that. It's like playing connect the dots, except you can add dots wherever you want there to be dots.
Mm-hmm.
And so, though I don't think this term has caught on yet, I talk about it as being augmented pareidolia. So you see something in the stuff on the sidewalk, and you will. I mean, fair warning, PSA, if you start using pareidolia consciously in your daily life, it will get the hint, and it will start to show up more and more. And I've heard reports of this where people are sending me pictures of things like, what about this? Like, yep, that, absolutely. I think you should draw on that because that's awesome. And so it's very easy to encourage. I mean, it's a very simple thing to strengthen in your brain. And so, yeah, over time, you will start to see not only just a thing that maybe you could make into more of a thing, but you will probably see several things and have to pick one, which is the biggest challenge I have now. Instead of the blank canvas that gives me nothing, I have the sidewalk that gives me sometimes too much, where I have to negotiate a deal between the 4 or 5 things that are suggested by these specks and cracks. Like, no, later, tomorrow. Tomorrow's your day. I'm doing him today. It's okay. But luckily it washes away in the rain. So as long as it rains tonight, tomorrow is his day. And we'll eventually get everybody a turn. Everybody's going to have a chance.
So much fun. So one last thing.
Yeah.
For folks coming to Ann Arbor that really want to see a David Zinn piece, they want to guarantee that experience. There are some opportunities for that. There are some permanent pieces that they can guarantee a sighting. Can you tell them where they could find those?
I think as as much as it's preferable to keep everything on a very scavenger hunt basis. I mean, I like the idea that you just have to be aware, but I do feel bad for the people who've contacted me and said, okay, we're coming to Ann Arbor. We live 500 miles away. We were hoping maybe we could see something on the street, and it's February 17th, and they just don't know. Like, try your luck, but not likely. So I'm glad that for those people, and for anyone else who wants a sure thing, there are some permanent installations currently on the streets of Ann Arbor. Now, mind you, nothing is truly permanent, but there are some that are a pretty safe bet. For now, the one actual mural-sized mural that I've created with the help of my Uncle John Copley and the Brush Monkeys is still holding up after, I think, almost 10 years now, on 5th Avenue, just south of Liberty. Its actual title isn't generally talked about, but its actual title, according to me, who I guess I get to give it a title.
Absolutely.
Is Laughing at Clouds. I think it's colloquially known as the Gene Kelly mural, because it is a mural of Gene Kelly from Singing in the Rain. And that, I am glad to say, although it is permanent, it is still consistent with the bulk of my work in that you do get a much better result if you view it from a very specific point of view. This is true of all of them. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not very obvious. Hopefully with that one, it's pretty obvious that your viewing experience will be improved if you actually stand in a particular place and don't just as you go by. And I'm very happy that people seem to have made it into a photo op, because the same thing that makes its particular viewpoint important makes it very easy for people to actually participate in the art, which is not something I planned. So that makes it all the cooler that people have figured out that they can do that. So there's that one. I have a couple of pieces in the local Power Art program that wraps utility boxes in vinyl reproductions of art. And I have 2 of those on the Main Street side of town that are holding up pretty well, but they are out in public, and so there may be a sticker on someone's face. I can't do anything about that, but it's worth finding those. And most reliably, and a main point of pride for me, because it involves the University of Michigan, and I am both a townie and an alum, are inside the Natural History Museum. The University of Michigan Natural History Museum has a wonderful new building, and when they moved into it, they let me hide 12 animals, well, 11 animals and 1 not necessarily real animal, depending on your view of science fiction, inside the building. So those are inside a museum. So I have very high hopes that, barring a really terrible accident with some industrial cleaner, those will probably be findable for a while. And it's a very accessible building, open to the public, where people can wander at will. And so those are always there, even in February. And they, I'm told, take some time to find.
So keep your eyes open. It's like finding one on the street, because you do have to look for them.
You do have to be aware
They're not
of your surroundings,
obvious.
and they are not all obvious at all.
I've been through that museum several times, and I have not spotted one. So you do have to
there you
really
go.
look. Yep.
Yeah, there are some clues that you can obtain if you really need a clue. Because there again, I felt kind of bad about any of the staff in the museum being harangued with questions of, where are they? Tell me where they are. Because small children can be very insistent. So I believe, though I haven't tested this in a while, that the people who work in the Natural History Museum are equipped with a set of short verbal clues, which they may throw at you if you give them a hard time about where the animals are. And then you can use those to sort it out for yourself.
Ah, good to know. Good to know. Well, thank you so much, David, for sitting down with me. If people want to see you work, they can come to the Ann Arbor
The Summer Festival.
Summer Festival, the Ann Arbor Summer Festival, or they can maybe try their luck on the streets of Ann Arbor.
They can, indeed.
And keep their eyes open.
They can, yes.